Hey guys, how's it going? It's Danconia and welcome back to the Overwatch League Roundup. And as of recording of this video, we still don't have all the teams with their confirmed 8 players signed after the window shut for having those 8 players signed. So, this is not the video I thought would be coming out today, but this is it. This is going to be my top 5 transfers so far in the Overwatch League off-season between 2019 and 2020. So, I think there's been some pretty big moves made here by some teams, and it could really turn the tides of their fortunes compared to last season going into next season. So, without further ado, let's start off at the LA Gladiators. Now, there's been a merry-go-round of tanks at the LA Gladiators in this transfer window, and the one I want to talk about is their acquisition of OG from the Dallas Fuel. In exchange for this, they let Decay move over to the Dallas Fuel. Now, I think this is a pretty good deal for both sides. Dallas Fuel were playing Trill quite a bit towards the end of last season, and also this gives them more DPS variety. And let's be honest, Dallas Fuel have been lacking in a lot of areas for quite a while, so it's nice to see Dallas Fuel acknowledging this and sorting it out. But we're not here to talk about Dallas, we're here to talk about OG and the LA Gladiators. The LA Gladiators let go of Raw earlier in the transfer window, and he is now signed for the Washington Justice. So they needed to replace their main tank, and they brought in OG. I think OG is actually a pretty good main tank. He's looked decent for the Dallas Fuel. I kind of don't understand why they started swapping Trill on OG. And I think he's actually a really good pickup for the Gladiators, because yes, he's Korean, but he's actually integrated really well in America. But I think he will work really well with the other Gladiators pickup, and that is re-signing Bishu. They have re-signed Bishu to the Gladiators, and I think that's massive for the Gladiators. It knits all of the components at the Gladiators together, and I've got a sneaky feeling that this OG Bishu tank partnership could be really, really good for the Gladiators. Also, they signed Space, and Space is also a fantastic off-tank that we've seen at the LA Valiant. So, I think, actually, the Gladiators tank line could be a bit of a dark horse for next year. Looking at some of the strongest tank lines in the Overwatch League, I think Gladiators actually could be up there with the likes of OG, Bishu, and Space. So I think OG is a really, really good signing for the LA Gladiators, and hopefully he can further his career, because I think he looked really good at Dallas, and I think he can go even further with the LA Gladiators in the future. But moving on, we have a signing that, in my opinion, could change the fortunes of our Canadian team from Toronto, the Toronto Defiant. So, Toronto Defiant have had an interesting transfer window. They didn't do all that well come the end of last season. They kind of did really well in Stage 1 and then fell off, which is unfortunate. But Toronto have looked to change things up. They brought a lot of Canadians in. They're going very homegrown. They've kind of gone half Canadian, half mix, which is kind of interesting. But I think the biggest signing for Toronto Defiant right now is Shurk. Man, that's a big, big signing. Yes, Shurk perhaps didn't have as good a season in 2019 as he did in the inaugural season, but I still really highly rate Shurk. Even though he's kind of like 25 now, so he's kind of old for an esports player when you think about it. Although we don't have any, really much to go on in terms of the Overwatch League, in terms of thinking about retirement age. But when you think 25, you're getting to the older side of things, right? But Shurk, I think, is a really, really good signing for the Toronto Defiant. I think he brings some leadership to the Toronto Defiant. He brings that superstar DPS power. We know how good Shurk can be, but not only that, we know how flexible and varied his hero roster is. So, I think Shurk is a fantastic signing for the Toronto Defiant, alongside their wealth of other signings like Kellux and Nevix and Beast and Agilities. They've got tons of great signings that they brought in over this transfer window. But the DPS line, the nearly all Canadian DPS line for the Toronto Defiant right now, is actually looking pretty darn good. I'm really, really, really looking forward to see how this works out for the Toronto Defiant, because if it works, that'll be really good. It'll be really nice to see the Toronto Defiant pop off with this roster. Now we move on to the Paris Eternal. Now there's a few players I could have picked from the Paris Eternal right now, because they have made some really, really good moves. and they have really thought about the future when they've looked at these moves as well. But I have to pick out Sparkle. I have to pick him out. Yes, he's not going to be eligible for the start of the Overwatch League 2020 season. His birthday is on May the 31st. He's aged 17. So, he is currently inactive on the Paris Eternal squad. So, yeah, you can kind of say he will be unproven for a time, but the thing is, he is proven. He's proven in Korean contenders. He comes from Element Mystique. He was Element Mystique's, one of Element Mystique's star DPS players. He was fantastic. Great projectile DPS player, right? I cannot speak highly enough of Sparkle. And the thing I can see in Sparkle is I can see another Sinatra story here for the Paris Eternal. I keep going back to the Paris Eternal, because I saw a lot of backlash from the Paris Eternal fans saying, why are we signing Koreans? We wanted a all European roster, blah, blah, blah. And that's all very well, but they've not got rid of their European core. They've not gone all Korean, which I think is very admirable in some respects. So, I think adding some stars like Hanbin, Sparkle, Z, it's really good additions for the Paris Eternal, and if they can weave them in, this could be monumental. Just look at the San Francisco Shock. It's just such an obvious comparison. They got in Sinatra and Super in some respects, but mainly Sinatra I'm talking about here. Got him in as a youngster. He was ineligible until about stage 3 of the inaugural season. Then we see San Francisco Shock start to pick up slightly, and then they just take the league by storm in the second season. And Sinatra not only wins the Overwatch League MVP award, he doesn't quite get the Playoffs MVP award, that goes to Choi Hyobin, but then he also gets World Cup MVP as well. Sinatra, since being, of age to play in the Overwatch League, absolutely popped off. And this could be a similar case with Sparkle. He could come into the Overwatch League and take the league by storm. So, my word to Paris Eternal fans is give the guy a chance, right? I think this is one of the biggest transfers of this transfer window. And that goes not only for what we've seen so far, but it will be one of the biggest transfers throughout the entire transfer window. So, keep an eye when Sparkle comes into the league at a later date, because, man, this could be monumental for the Paris Eternal. But, moving on, and we have another massive signing. This involves the London Spitfire and the Philadelphia Fusion, our two finalists for the inaugural season. Now, if you know the connection, it's an off-tank player called Fury. So, Fury was let go from the London Spitfire, signing for the Philadelphia Fusion. And, yeah, London Spitfire fans weren't chirpy about this, I'll be honest with you. Fury was a fantastic diva for the London Spitfire throughout these past 2 seasons. Possibly the best diva in the league, you have to say. And for Fusion to pick him up, but he's also got a really good Zarya mind and a good Roadhog, but he also demonstrated he can play Orisa. Yes, he played Orisa for the London Spitfire during the playoffs of last season, not the Sigma, because the Sigma was played by Gesture, who is now at the Salt Dynasty. So, Fury has a really varied hero pool. And I think, honestly, he could become Philadelphia Fusion's star player. Really, really, really could. And especially with him linking up with their main tank, Sado, who is also obviously South Korean, I think Sado can be a pretty good main tank given the right partner. Fury is a great partner main tank. And then you've got to ask the question what happens to Poco with the Philadelphia Fusion. We haven't had that cleared up, but maybe we'll get that cleared up pretty soon. But also you've got other players like Carpe, Alarm, Ivy that Fury could really, really link up well with. And he won't have any problems integrating with the likes of Boombox and Funny Astro because he will have learned English at the London Spitfire. So, I think this is a really, really good signing for the Philadelphia Fusion. I think Fury, honestly, is a good signing for anyone. Fury is a fantastic off-tank. And especially looking at the changes we've now got on the PTR that most likely the Overwatch League will play on, we could see more varied meta away from Double Shield, which will work into Fury's favour anyway. Especially with perhaps a bit of an upturn in Diva play, depending on where the meta goes, but certainly Zarya. So, I think this is a really, really good signing for the Fusion. but we've got one more to look at. And this will be the Houston Outlaws. I think out of all of the transfers we've seen so far, I think this is the most game-changing transfer for a team. And this is Hydration to the Houston Outlaws. I think Hydration was fantastic for the Gladiators, right? And I was honestly surprised to see him leave. When I heard he signed for the Houston Outlaws, remember this was prior to the Houston Outlaws being sold, I was quite frankly gobsmacked. I really didn't understand how the Houston Outlaws had attracted such a good player. And the great thing about Hydration is, as we saw with him at the Gladiators, he has got a lot of flexibility. Yes, he's a projectile DPS, but he can play the Orisa, he can play the Wrecking Ball, he's got a bit of Brigitte in him, but pretty much every DPS has got a bit of Brigitte in them. So he's really flexible, right? So if you want him to adjust to a main tank role, he could do. If you want him to stay on that projectile DPS, and this is how I see him, I think he might be a replacement for Jake, because I think Jake might retire pretty soon and go into casting. But Hydration, I think, is honestly, he really could be the standout player for the Houston Outlaws this season, providing they don't pick anyone else up. They have just signed Rappel, which is one that honestly really could have made it onto this list. Rappel is a fantastic signing for the Houston Outlaws, but Hydration, I really think he is game-changing for Houston coming into this 2020 season. He was fantastic at the Los Angeles Gladiators. He was fantastic for Team USA in the 2018 World Cup, even though they slipped up at that World Cup. And he's always had fairly high-place finishes in the Overwatch League. 5th to 6th, you know, losing to the San Francisco Shot, losing to the NYXL, losing to the London Spitfire. These are no mean feats, right? These are nothing to be sniffed at. These are really good teams they've lost to. Remember, they were losing to the London Spitfire in the inaugural season when London were good, right? So this is nothing to be ashamed of. I think Hydration is possibly a really serious game changer for the Houston Outlaws coming into this 2020 season. And quite honestly, this whole Houston Outlaws team could look and play very different to what we've seen before. With the backing they've got now, the players they've signed, I would be afraid of this team going into 2020, with Hydration at the helm of their DPS most likely. There are plenty of other players that could have gone onto this list. I've already mentioned Rappel. There are tons of players that could have gone on this list. You know, Bishua who I've mentioned as well. Hotbar going to the NYXL, that's a real interesting one, let's be honest. There's tons of players we could have picked out here, but that's kind of like my top ones. If you want to put in the comments below who you think are some of the top signings of this transfer window so far, then please let me know, and I will probably take a look and respond to it. But for now, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I will see you in the next video. See you then!